The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Rosie's diner, casting long shadows across cracked linoleum and faded formica tables. Lieutenant Colonel Adriana Ghost Valdez sat hunched over her third cup of black coffee, her weathered hands wrapped around the ceramic mug like it contained the last warmth in the world. The newspaper lay open before her, headlines blurring together in meaningless type, but she wasn't reading. She was remembering. At 52, Ghost looked like any other tired woman nursing coffee in a roadside diner. Gray threads wove through her dark hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were civilian jeans, a worn leather jacket, scuffed boots that had walked 1,000 miles. Nothing about her suggested she had once been the most feared pilot in the United States Air Force. Nothing hinted that her call sign had been whispered with reverence and terror across 3 war zones. The bell above the diner door chimed as it opened. Ghost didn't look up. She perfected the art of invisibility over the past 5 years since her forced retirement, blending into crowds and corners like smoke dissipating into morning air. But the footsteps that approached her table weren't random. They moved with purpose, with military precision. "Ma'am." The voice was young, respectful, uncertain. Ghost raised her eyes slowly, prepared to deflect another well-meaning veteran outreach volunteer or perhaps a journalist chasing ghosts of old wars. Instead, she found herself staring at 6 men in civilian clothes whose bearing screamed military despite their attempts at camouflage. Their faces were hard, sun-weathered, marked by the particular kind of exhaustion that came from operations where failure meant death. The tallest one stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively to where his sidearm would rest. "Lieutenant Colonel Valdez." Ghost's blood chilled. No one called her that anymore. No one even knew that name in this forgotten corner of Nevada, where she'd chosen to disappear after the Pentagon had decided her unorthodox methods were too controversial for peacetime. She'd been erased from most official records, her service classified so deeply it might as well have been fiction. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said evenly, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had learned to become nobody. The man's eyes never wavered. Behind him, his team spread out with unconscious tactical positioning, blocking exits, watching windows, reading the room like a potential battlefield. Ghost recognized the choreography immediately. These weren't just any soldiers. The subtle confidence, the way they moved like water flowing around obstacles, the complete absence of wasted motion, these were Navy SEALs. "Colonel," the leader said again, his voice carrying a weight that made every word feel like a dropped stone. "We need to talk." The diner suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing inward as if the past itself was closing in around her. Command had always been a double-edged sword for Adriana Valdez. Born in El Paso to a mechanic father and a nurse mother, she'd grown up understanding that respect was earned with grease under your fingernails and blood on your knuckles. The Air Force Academy had tried to sand down her rough edges, but Ghost had learned to hide her fire rather than extinguish it. She was brilliant with aircraft, intuitive with tactics, and absolutely fearless in combat, qualities that made her invaluable and also made her dangerous to those who preferred their wars clean and their heroes manageable. Her call sign hadn't come from stealth, though everyone assumed it had. It came from her ability to disappear entire enemy air squadrons, to make them vanish from radar screens and battlefield maps as if they had never existed at all. Ghost didn't just shoot down enemy aircraft. She erased them so completely that intelligence reports would later question whether they had ever been deployed in the first place. The SEAL team leader, his name tag read Martinez, slid into the booth across from her without invitation. His teammates maintained their perimeter, professional and alert, but not threatening. Not yet. "3 days ago," Martinez said quietly, "we lost contact with a classified operation in the Strait of Hormuz. 12 hours later, satellite imagery showed what appeared to be impossible aircraft maneuvers. Signature patterns that match exactly with classified reports from Syria, 2019. Afghanistan 2020, Libya 2021. Ghost's coffee had gone cold, but she continued holding the mug, using its familiar weight to anchor herself to the present moment. I've been out of the game for 5 years. The game hasn't been out of you, Martinez replied. His eyes were steady, gray like storm clouds. What we saw 3 days ago, that was your work, Colonel, your signature. Problem is, according to every official record, you were never in the Middle East 3 days ago. Hell, according to most records, you don't even exist anymore. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Someone was using her techniques, her strategies, her very identity to conduct operations that could reshape the balance of power in one of the world's most volatile regions. But who had access to classified methodologies that had been buried so deep even she couldn't access her own service records? Who sent you? Ghost asked. Martinez glanced at his team, then back at her. That's complicated, ma'am. Outside Rosie's diner, 3 black SUVs sat parked in formation, their tinted windows reflecting the desert sun like dead eyes. Ghost had noticed them the moment the SEALs entered, but now she counted additional vehicles positioning themselves along the highway. This wasn't a recruitment mission. This was containment. The reality of her situation crystallized with military clarity. Someone had used her methods to conduct an operation that had clearly gone sideways, and now she was either being brought in to fix the problem or being eliminated to bury the evidence. In her experience, the Pentagon rarely chose the first option when the second was cleaner. How many of them are out there? She asked, nodding toward the window. Martinez didn't pretend to misunderstand, enough to ensure this conversation stays private. He leaned forward slightly. But not enough to stop you if you decide to walk away. We both know that. It was true. Ghost had disappeared from military radar for 5 years because she wanted to, not because she lacked options. She could vanish from this diner and these men would spend months chasing shadows. But Martinez was counting on her curiosity, on the part of her that had never been able to resist an impossible mission. Show me the footage, she said. Martinez nodded to one of his teammates, who produced a tablet and slid it across the table. The screen showed grainy satellite imagery of the Persian Gulf, timestamp indicating 3:47 hours local time. Ghost watched aircraft moving in patterns that defied conventional physics, executing maneuvers that should have torn the wings off any known fighter jet. But she recognized the movements immediately. The ascending spiral that bled off missile lock, the inverted dive that used gravity to accelerate beyond pursuit capability, the sudden 90-degree turn that leveraged atmospheric pressure like a slingshot. These weren't just her techniques. They were her innovations, her solutions to problems that had nearly killed her before she'd solved them. Impossible, she whispered. That's what we thought too, Martinez said grimly. Until we ran the analysis through classified databases and found exact matches with your combat records from operations that officially never happened. Someone had not only accessed her sealed files, but had somehow replicated her unique flying style with mechanical precision. The implications were staggering and terrifying. Her methods had been developed through instinct, desperation, and countless hours of pushing aircraft beyond their design limitations. They couldn't be taught from manuals or simulated in training programs. They could only be learned through experience, through the kind of life-or-death situations that forged pilots in fire. The coffee in her mug had formed a thin skin on its surface, cold and bitter as the truth settling in her chest. Martinez tapped the screen. Whoever flew this mission knew your tactics better than some of your former squadron mates. They executed maneuvers that took you years to perfect, and they did it flawlessly. He paused, watching her face carefully. The question is, how is that possible when you're the only pilot alive who's ever successfully performed them in combat? Ghost stared at the screen, watching her own ghost dance across the digital sky. The aircraft in the footage moved with her rhythm, her instincts, her hard-earned wisdom. It was like watching someone else wear her face, speak with her voice, steal her very soul and use it for purposes unknown. "There's something else," Martinez said quietly. He swiped to a new image, a close-up photograph of an aircraft canopy. Even through the pixelated satellite imagery, Ghost could make out something that made her blood run cold. Painted on the side of the cockpit, clearly visible despite the distance and poor resolution, was a small white cross, her personal marking, the symbol she'd painted on every aircraft she'd ever flown in combat. The mark that no one else alive knew the meaning of. The diner seemed to spin around Ghost as memories crashed over her like artillery shells. The white cross wasn't just a symbol, it was a promise. A reminder of the night she'd earned her call sign, when she'd been the only pilot to return from a mission that had gone so wrong it had been erased from official history. The cross honored the pilots who hadn't made it home, and it carried the weight of every impossible choice she'd made since. Only 3 people had ever known the significance of that cross: herself, her former squadron commander Colonel Jack "Reaper" Morrison, and her weapons systems officer Captain Alina "Phoenix" Torres. Morrison had died of cancer 2 years ago. Torres had been killed in action over Syria, which meant either Alina Torres had somehow survived an explosion that had scattered her aircraft across 6 square miles of desert, or someone with access to the most classified operational records in the Air Force was playing a very dangerous game. "Who else has seen this footage?" Ghost asked. 6 people. The satellite analyst who first flagged the anomaly, 2 intelligence officers, the Secretary of Defense, and us. Martinez's voice carried the weight of absolute secrecy. "The analyst thinks it's an equipment malfunction. Intelligence thinks it's enemy technology. The secretary thinks it's either a ghost or a problem that needs to disappear." Ghost understood the subtext perfectly. The Secretary of Defense wasn't interested in explanations that complicated his worldview. If this mystery couldn't be solved quickly and quietly, it would be classified out of existence, along with anyone who had knowledge of it. "And what do you think?" she asked. Martinez met her eyes directly. "I think you're the only person alive who can fly like that, which means either you were in the Persian Gulf 3 days ago, or someone's stolen more than just your techniques." He paused, letting the implications settle. "Either way, we need answers before this goes beyond black ops and into international incident territory." The tablet screen reflected Ghost's face as she stared at the impossible footage, seeing her own skills weaponized by unknown hands for unknown purposes. Outside the diner, the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a landscape that had always promised freedom to those brave enough to claim it. Now it felt like a cage. The weight of unspoken history pressed down on the diner like incoming weather. Ghost had spent 5 years convincing herself that her war was over, that the nightmares and the guilt and the crushing responsibility of being the military's most effective and most expendable pilot could be buried under civilian routine and anonymous solitude. But wars had a way of following soldiers home, even when those soldiers changed their names and disappeared into the American heartland. "There's more, isn't there?" Ghost said. It wasn't a question. Martinez nodded grimly. The operation that went dark was a joint task force mission. Navy SEALs, Air Force Special Operations, Marine Force Recon. 47 personnel inserted into hostile territory with air cover provided by classified aircraft using your documented flight patterns. He paused, the silence stretching like a held breath. 0 personnel extracted. 0 radio contact for 72 hours. And satellite shows no wreckage, no debris, no evidence that 47 of America's most elite operators ever existed. The math was simple and horrific. An entire joint task force had vanished without a trace, protected by aircraft flown with Ghost's techniques by pilots who shouldn't exist. Either this was the most catastrophic operational failure in recent military history, or it was something else entirely, something that made conventional failure look optimistic. "What was the mission?" Ghost asked. Classified above your clearance level, Martinez replied automatically, then caught himself. Above your former clearance level. The correction hung between them like an accusation. Ghost had held clearances that technically didn't exist, had been briefed on operations that had never been planned, had executed missions that were erased before the aircraft touched down. The idea that anything could be classified above her former level meant this operation had originated from the darkest corners of the military-industrial complex. She stood up slowly, fishing a $10 bill from her jacket pocket and placing it on the table next to her untouched hash browns. "I appreciate the visit, gentlemen, but I'm retired." "Ma'am," Martinez said softly, not moving from the booth, "we found Alina Torres." Ghost froze halfway to standing, her heart slamming against her ribs like shrapnel. Alina Torres had been her weapons systems officer, her partner, her closest friend in a world where friendship was a luxury that got people killed. Torres had been in the backseat of Ghost's F-15 E-Strike Eagle the night everything went wrong in Syria, when their mission to eliminate a high-value target had turned into a desperate fight for survival against odds that should have been mathematically impossible. Ghost had been flying solo missions ever since, telling herself it was because single-seat aircraft gave her more tactical flexibility. The truth was that she couldn't bear the weight of another person's life riding behind her stick, trusting her to bring them home. "Alina Torres died in Syria," Ghost said, her voice barely audible above the diner's background noise of sizzling eggs and classic rock radio. "I watched her aircraft disintegrate." "We thought so too," Martinez replied, "until 3 days ago when someone using her call sign provided air support for our missing operation." He tapped the tablet screen. Same voice, same tactical communications, same uncanny ability to predict enemy movements that made you two the most effective aircrew in the theater. The floor beneath Ghost's feet felt unsteady, as if the entire world had shifted off its axis. Alina Torres, Phoenix, had been the one person who truly understood Ghost's unconventional methods, who could anticipate her moves before Ghost made them, who could read an aerial battlefield like poetry written in contrails and missile signatures. If Phoenix was alive, if she was somehow flying again, then everything Ghost had believed about that night in Syria was wrong. The diner door chimed again as more men in civilian clothes entered, their practiced casualness fooling no one. Martinez's team was being reinforced, which meant someone with serious authority wanted to ensure Ghost didn't simply walk away from this conversation. The walls were closing in with military efficiency. "Where is she?" Ghost asked. The question that would haunt intelligence analysts for decades had a deceptively simple beginning. How do you make an entire joint task force disappear without leaving evidence? The answer, as Ghost was beginning to understand, lay not in conventional military tactics, but in the spaces between official records, where operations existed in quantum states of plausible deniability. Martinez slid a classified folder across the table, its cover stamped with security classifications that made Ghost's eyes water just to read them. "Before we go any further, I need you to understand what you're stepping into," he said. "This isn't just about missing personnel or stolen tactics. This is about technology that officially doesn't exist, funding sources that aren't supposed to be connected, and aircraft that were never built." Ghost opened the folder with hands that had once guided missiles through impossible trajectories and found photographs that redefined impossible. The aircraft in the images looked familiar yet wrong, like someone had taken her beloved F-15 and reimagined it through the lens of science fiction. The airframe was sleeker, the engines positioned differently, the wing configuration subtly altered in ways that would fundamentally change flight characteristics. "Experimental prototypes," Martinez explained, "built using data from your classified missions, incorporating modifications based on your combat innovations. The project was shut down officially in 2022, but funding continued through black budget allocations that trace back to," he hesitated, "sources we're still investigating." Ghost studied the photographs with a pilot's eye, immediately recognizing the design philosophy behind the modifications. Someone had analyzed her impossible maneuvers and reverse-engineered aircraft capable of performing them reliably, without requiring the kind of split-second intuition that had nearly killed her dozens of times. They had taken her artistry and made it mechanical, reproducible, weaponizable. "How many were built?" she asked. "6 confirmed prototypes, 2 crashed during testing, 2 are in storage at Area 51. Martinez's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 2 are missing. The coffee shop suddenly felt like a trap, but not in the way Ghost had initially assumed. This wasn't about containing her. It was about unleashing her. Someone had stolen her life's work, weaponized her innovations, and was now using them for operations that fell so far outside official channels that the military's own elite units couldn't track them. "The missing aircraft," Ghost said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn like sunrise after a night raid. "Someone's been using them to conduct unauthorized operations." "We believe so, yes ma'am." Martinez glanced at his team, then back at her. "Operations that require the kind of piloting skills that only exist in classified after-action reports. Your after-action reports." Ghost closed the folder, but the images remained burned into her retinas. Someone had built aircraft specifically designed to replicate her unique abilities, then made those aircraft disappear along with the pilots trained to fly them. The missing Joint Task Force hadn't simply vanished. They had been extracted by aircraft that shouldn't exist, flown by pilots who shouldn't have her skills. The question wasn't just who was behind this anymore. The question was what they intended to do with technology that could make America's most elite military units disappear at will. Outside the diner, heat shimmers rose from asphalt like ghosts of the dead, and Ghost realized that her war had never really ended. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to call her back. The folder contained one final photograph that made Ghost's world tilt sideways. It was a surveillance image taken from a distance, grainy and indistinct, showing 2 figures standing beside one of the modified aircraft. The image quality was terrible, but Ghost would have recognized that silhouette anywhere. The way one person stood with weight shifted to her left leg, favoring an old injury, the particular angle at which she held her helmet under her arm. Elena Torres was alive. But the second figure in the photograph was what made Ghost's hands shake as she held the image. It was herself, or someone who looked exactly like her, wearing flight gear she'd never seen, standing beside an aircraft she'd never flown, in what appeared to be a hangar that didn't exist on any blueprint she'd ever accessed. "When was this taken?" Ghost asked, though she dreaded the answer. 18 hours ago, Martinez said. "At a facility our satellites can't quite locate, using technology our engineers can't quite replicate, by personnel who can't quite exist." Ghost stared at her own face looking back at her from the photograph, understanding that someone had not only stolen her identity, but had somehow managed to make that theft physically manifest. This wasn't about missing aircraft or unauthorized operations anymore. This was about the fundamental nature of reality itself. The coffee shop door chimed again, and Ghost looked up to see a woman enter who moved with familiar grace, who carried herself with the particular confidence that came from flying combat missions in contested airspace. The woman's hair was shorter now, streaked with premature gray, and a scar ran from her left temple to her jaw, but Ghost would have recognized Captain Elena Torres anywhere. Phoenix was alive. She was here, and she was walking directly toward their table with the kind of purposeful stride that preceded either salvation or catastrophe. Martinez's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon, but Ghost raised her palm slightly, a gesture that, in the unspoken language of military pilots, meant hold your position and trust my judgment. She had questions that needed answers before anyone started shooting. "Hello, Ghost," Elena said as she slid into the booth beside Martinez, forcing him to shift uncomfortably. Her voice carried the same warmth it always had, but underneath lay something new, a hardness that came from surviving things that should have killed her. Been a while. 5 years, 3 months, 12 days, Ghost replied automatically. Since Syria. Since you left me to die in Syria, Alina corrected gently, without accusation. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the kind of clinical precision that pilots used when debriefing missions where emotion could compromise future operations. The words hit Ghost like anti-aircraft fire, direct and devastating. She had relived that night in Syria thousands of times, analyzing every decision, every microsecond of timing, every variable that had led to Alina's aircraft being shredded by enemy missiles, while Ghost's had somehow remained intact. The official investigation had concluded that Phoenix's death was the result of enemy action and mechanical failure. Ghost's unofficial investigation had concluded that she had failed her partner when it mattered most. Your aircraft exploded, Ghost said quietly. I saw the fireball. I called in the coordinates for recovery. They found debris scattered across 6 miles. They found decoy debris, Alina replied, scattered exactly where I wanted them to find it. She turned to Martinez. Thank you for bringing her here, but we'll take it from here. Martinez didn't move. Ma'am, with respect, my orders come from. Your orders come from people who think they understand this situation, Alina interrupted. They don't. This operation has been 5 years in the making, and it's just getting started. Ghost felt the conversation spinning away from anything resembling official military business. Alina wasn't talking like a rescued pilot grateful to be reunited with her former partner. She was talking like someone in command of her own agenda, someone who had orchestrated this entire encounter. You faked your death, Ghost said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The mission in Syria was cover for extraction. Alina nodded. The best cover is always real danger. We needed the Pentagon to believe I was dead, and we needed you to disappear into civilian life where you couldn't be monitored. She gestured around the empty diner. Took you longer than we expected to surface somewhere we could reach you safely. Martinez was looking between them like a man watching a tennis match played with live grenades. Ma'am, I'm going to need some clarification about who we refers to in this context. Alina smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. People who understand that sometimes protecting America requires working outside official channels. She stood up, her movement fluid and confident. People who have been preparing for threats that the Pentagon isn't ready to acknowledge. Ghost remained seated, her mind racing through tactical calculations. Alina was alive, had been alive for 5 years, and had somehow acquired modified aircraft that could replicate Ghost's unique capabilities. The missing joint task force, the impossible footage, the photographs showing Ghost's apparent doppelganger. It all pointed to a shadow organization operating with military precision, but without official oversight. You're running an unsanctioned Black Ops program, Ghost said. We're running the only program that matters, Alina replied. The one that's going to keep America safe when the conventional military fails. She looked directly at Martinez, which it will, sooner than any of you want to admit. The SEAL team leader's jaw tightened. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us for debriefing. Alina laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Good luck with that. Before anyone could react, the diner's lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, casting everything in hellish red. But in those crucial seconds of darkness and confusion, Alina Torres vanished as completely as if she had never existed. Ghost sat in the red-tinged shadows, surrounded by some of America's most elite soldiers, and realized that her war wasn't just continuing, it was evolving into something she didn't recognize. The emergency lighting threw stark shadows across Martinez's face as he barked orders into his radio. Perimeter teams report. Target is female 5'6", dark hair, moving on foot from the diner. Static answered him. Teams 2 and 3 acknowledge. More static. Any unit, please respond. Ghost watched the SEAL leaders' growing frustration with professional detachment. Alina had always been good at disappearing, but this level of coordination suggested resources and planning that went far beyond individual skill. The communications blackout was surgical, precise, temporary, the hallmark of electronic warfare capabilities that officially didn't exist. Your radios will come back online in about 90 seconds, Ghost said calmly. Long enough for her to reach extraction, not long enough to cause permanent equipment damage. She met Martinez's eyes. Alina always was considerate that way. Martinez stared at her with the expression of a man whose carefully planned operation had just evaporated. You knew this was going to happen. I suspected. Ghost stood up, leaving the classified folder on the table. Alina doesn't make social calls. If she wanted me to know she was alive, she'd have sent a letter. If she wanted me dead, I'd never have seen her coming. She adjusted her leather jacket, suddenly feeling every year of her age. Which means she wants something else entirely. The diner door chimed as two more SEALs entered, their tactical gear barely concealed under civilian jackets. Martinez gestured for them to maintain positions but not escalate. Whatever Alina had done to their communications, he wasn't going to compound the situation by starting a firefight in a public space. Colonel, Martinez said carefully, we need your cooperation. This situation has implications beyond missing personnel or stolen technology. There are indicators suggesting this shadow program has been conducting operations globally, targeting assets that could destabilize entire regions. Ghost looked out the window at the desert landscape, her pilot's eye automatically calculating wind patterns, visibility conditions, potential landing zones for aircraft that might need to extract personnel quickly and quietly. You want me to help you hunt her down? We want you to help us understand what she's become, Martinez replied, and what she's planning next. The distinction was important. Hunt implied capture or elimination. Understanding suggested that Alina Torres had transformed into something that required study rather than simple apprehension. Given the technologies involved and the scope of operations, Ghost suspected the second interpretation was more accurate and far more dangerous. I'll need access to the full classified files, Ghost said. Not summaries, not edited highlights, everything. Martinez hesitated. Your security clearances were revoked when you retired. Then reinstate them, Ghost said simply. Or find someone else who can fly like Alina Torres and stop whatever she started. She let that challenge hang in the air for exactly 5 seconds. We both know that person doesn't exist. The radios crackled back to life with a burst of static and confused voices, reporting all clear status and demanding instructions. Martinez ignored them, studying Ghost's face with the intensity of someone reading intelligence reports by candlelight. There's something else, he said finally. Something that changes everything. He reached into his jacket and produced a small device that looked like a military GPS unit, but with modifications that suggested capabilities beyond navigation. 3 hours ago, this device received a transmission on a frequency that's supposed to be impossible to access outside of Air Force command centers. Ghost recognized the device immediately. It was a tactical communication unit designed for deep cover operations, encrypted with quantum algorithms and shielded against detection by anything short of dedicated intelligence agencies. She'd used similar equipment during missions that had never appeared in any official logs. What did the transmission say? Martinez activated the device, and Alina Torres' voice filled the diner with crystal clarity. Ghost, if you're hearing this, then Martinez found you and you're deciding whether to trust him. Don't. The operation in the Persian Gulf was bait, designed to flush out exactly the people who just surrounded your table. They work for the same people who have been hunting us in Syria, who classified our real mission records to hide their own involvement. A pause, filled with electronic static. Meet me where we used to practice impossible landings. You have 6 hours before they disappear you permanently. Come alone and bring your gear. It's time to finish what we started." The transmission ended with a soft click that sounded like a death sentence being sealed. Ghost looked around the diner at the SEAL team, at Martinez's carefully neutral expression, at the black SUVs visible through windows that now felt like crosshairs. Alina's message had recontextualized everything. This wasn't a rescue mission or even a manhunt. This was a trap, and Ghost had walked into it with the naivety of someone who had assumed her war was over. "Where we used to practice impossible landings," Martinez said thoughtfully. "Any idea where she means?" Ghost almost smiled. Alina was brilliant, paranoid, and absolutely tactical in her thinking. She had just provided Ghost with information that proved her identity while simultaneously giving her an extraction route that no one else would understand. "Area 51, Ghost lied smoothly. "We used to practice night landings on the restricted range when we were developing new approach vectors. It was plausible enough to be believable and wrong enough to send any pursuit in the opposite direction from where Alina actually meant. The real location was a stretch of abandoned highway in the Nevada desert where she and Alina had practiced emergency landings during their off-duty hours, pushing their aircraft and themselves beyond official safety parameters. It was where they had developed the trust that made them the most effective aircrew in the Air Force, where they had learned to read each other's minds across the static of combat communications. It was also exactly 73 miles southwest of their current position, along roads that would be perfect for surveillance and interdiction by anyone who wanted to ensure Ghost never reached her destination. 6 hours, Martinez mused, assuming you intended to cooperate, which I'm beginning to doubt. He gestured slightly, and his teammates began moving with subtle coordination that suggested imminent action. I'm afraid we can't allow you to leave until this situation is resolved. Ghost laughed, a sound like wind through desert sage. You can't allow me to leave. She stood up slowly, her movement casual but purposeful. Martinez, I've been flying combat missions since before your teammates could legally drive. I've extracted personnel from situations that would give your psychologists nightmares. And you think 6 SEALs in a roadside diner constitute adequate containment? Her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had never been captured, because she had never allowed herself to be cornered. The SEALs were competent, professional, and completely out of their element. They were trained to fight enemies who followed conventional rules of engagement, who could be tracked by satellites and predicted by intelligence algorithms. Ghost had never been conventional. "Ma'am," Martinez said carefully, recognizing the shift in her demeanor, "we're not your enemies here." "No," Ghost agreed, "but you're working for them." She picked up her coffee cup and drained the last cold drops, buying herself time to calculate distances, angles, and possibilities. Alina was right about one thing: this was all bait. The question is whether you know you're the hook or whether you think you're the fisherman. Before Martinez could respond, the lights went out again, but this time they stayed out. In the absolute darkness that followed, Ghost moved with the fluid precision of someone who had navigated aircraft through night operations where visibility measured in inches rather than miles. She heard Martinez shouting orders, heard his team responding with professional calm despite their confusion, heard the distinctive sound of tactical equipment being activated in preparation for whatever came next. But she also heard something else: the distant sound of rotor blades approaching fast and low, flying NOE patterns that would keep them invisible to most detection systems until they were directly overhead. Alina's extraction was arriving exactly on schedule, which meant her former weapons systems officer had been watching this entire conversation from the moment Ghost had sat down with her morning coffee. The helicopter noise grew louder, and through the diner's windows, Ghost could see the silhouette of an aircraft that definitely wasn't in any official inventory. It moved like liquid shadow, its rotor signature muffled by modifications that suggested stealth capabilities decades beyond current technology. "Ghost?" Alina's voice came through speakers hidden somewhere in the diner's ceiling. 30 seconds to extraction. North exit, move now." Ghost didn't hesitate. She had spent 5 years trying to forget Alina Torres, trying to bury the guilt and the questions and the crushing weight of partnership that had defined her military career. But hearing Phoenix's voice again, seeing proof that her best friend had somehow survived the impossible, awakened something in Ghost that retirement had never quite managed to kill. She moved toward the north exit as Martinez and his team scrambled to reestablish communications and control. In the darkness, she was invisible, untouchable, everything her call sign had ever promised. Behind her, she heard Martinez shouting into his radio. "All units, target is mobile, repeat, target is mobile and moving toward extraction." But his words were lost in the growing thunder of rotor blades and the deeper truth that some operations transcended official authority. Ghost reached the exit as the modified helicopter settled into a hover just outside the diner, its landing skids barely touching the ground. The side door slid open, revealing Alina Torres in full flight gear, extending her hand with the same confidence she'd shown during their most dangerous missions. "Time to go," Alina shouted over the rotor noise. Ghost looked back once at Martinez, who was watching from the diner window with the expression of a man who knew he'd just lost something irreplaceable. Then she took Alina's hand and stepped into the aircraft that would carry her back into a war she'd thought was over. The helicopter rose into the desert sky with the kind of smooth power that suggested engines far beyond conventional capability. Ghost strapped herself into the co-pilot seat, muscle memory guiding her hands through pre-flight checks for systems she'd never seen before. The aircraft responded like a living thing, sensitive to her touch in ways that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with flying in the first place. "Nice ride," Ghost said over the intercom. "Wait until you see what it can really do," Alina replied, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone showing off a favorite weapon. The aircraft banked hard left, accelerating with impossible smoothness toward the mountains that rimmed the valley. "We've made some improvements since Syria." Ghost studied the instrument panel, recognizing some systems while struggling to understand others. The avionics were a hybrid of familiar military technology and innovations that seemed to leap decades into the future. Power output readings suggested engines that could push this helicopter well beyond the performance envelope of any rotorcraft she'd ever flown. "Who's we, Phoenix?" Ghost asked, using Alina's call sign deliberately. Some conversations required the intimacy of shared danger to cut through years of separation and secrets. Alina was quiet for a long moment, concentrating on flying through mountain valleys that would challenge even experienced pilots. When she finally answered, her voice carried the weight of someone who had been carrying secrets for too long. "People who understand that the next war won't be fought by conventional forces using conventional weapons," Alina said.